Welcome to our fall exhibition opening. As Margaret said, I'm Charo Neville. I'm the curator of the Kamloops Art Gallery, but this evening is not an exhibition that I've curated. I have my lovely colleagues here who came from Vancouver yesterday, who are going to take us through. So we're completely honored to have Diana Freundl from the Vancouver Art Gallery, where she's senior curator, and Zoe Chan, who was the assistant curator at the Vancouver Art Gallery and worked on this exhibition with Diana, but is now the curator of the Richmond Art Gallery. So I'm going to just pass it over to you to tell us what we're looking at here.
Thank you, Charo. I think we just also want to both take this opportunity to also thank Charo for her very thoughtful installation and collaboration. We walked through the show yesterday, and it's always amazing to see the works again, because it's been years, but seeing how different institutions create different juxtapositions or relationships between works. But also thank you to the whole team, because Emily has done incredible programming, which I hope you come back to, and also a very huge thanks to Margaret for the invitation, and to Dina, the elder, who did the very thoughtful and warm welcome. So I think to begin, unfortunately, yes, we're such a big group, and the works are quite small, so it's hard for us to maybe walk around together as a group, but please, we won't be offended if you get up and walk towards the works we talk about. We'll point them out. So rather than stare at us, you should be staring at the work. So, and also very embarrassingly, but we're probably going to also read from our notes every now and again. Otherwise, we could be here a lot longer than 1 hour. Yeah, to begin, just a little bit about the background of the show. It's titled "The Stories That Animate Us." It really began as a collection show drawn from the Vancouver Art Gallery's collection with a few strategic loans that we did with local artists and other Canadian artists, but it was at the time of the pandemic. So this was really it began in 2020. It opened in the beginning of 2021. So it was really at that time that you could no longer ship works. Everyone was really looking, if you had the fortune of having a collection, at looking at their collection. So it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of dig in and to bring out things we hadn't seen for a long time. And think around themes and what you have and what you don't have, where the holes are. And so we began as a pairing. This was an exhibition that was created in relationship to another show of a Chinese artist, Sun Xun, and he had done stop motion animation. So that's, if you're familiar with the work of William Kentridge, it's very similar work to that, the very painstaking process of creating drawings, and each drawing is then shot to create the frames of the film. So you really see the sort of, the artist, the gesture of the hand in the work. And his story was about his hometown, Fulton, and its history of coal mining, and how the coal mining that led to the country's economic boom was also leading to the destruction of his hometown, of the nature of the environment, of the animals. And so we were thinking, and when I say we, I'm talking about Zoe, we were thinking about how artists use animation to tell stories about different times in history, but also to help create meaning from our current realities. And so we then wanted to, we were thinking about the stories that would be told of our time, and wanted to look to the collection. And so we were thinking of doing animation, and we began looking and realized that that was the animation. So that there was one work, but that really the basis of a lot of animation is coming from drawing. So we then sort of opened up to what else we'd show, and I'm gonna turn it to Zoe to sort of continue our thinking around that.
Yeah, so like Diana said, we found artists who were working with, local artists who were working in animation. I had the opportunity we both had the opportunity to look into the collection. I really am a huge fan of drawing, the medium of drawing. I think it's, I was thinking of it as a kind of a precursor to animation, a way of storytelling that kind of goes back to any culture, and it spans time up to the present. So I was delighted, to find prints by, artists by like Goya, David Hockney, and so on. And I just think drawing is just a wonderful medium for storytelling. It has that fluidity, that flexibility. There's that ability to erase and start over. So we're just really excited to show you these different types of storytelling. Diverse ways of storytelling was also very important. We'll unpack that a bit more as we go through the exhibition. Was there anything else?
No, I think that's really the basis, and then the fun part began, where we really dug into the collection to look at, the Vancouver Art Gallery has a lot of works on paper and a lot of prints, but really we wanted to show, the space wasn't going to be very large, so a show that would show the various mediums of works on paper, so painting, printmaking, and which you see in this. But one thing, then maybe we'll move into the works, is that when these shows do tour, and this is the last stop, it's been to Nanaimo, to Kelowna, and here in Kamloops. Each venue has a different size, so sometimes they expand, and we're really lucky here to work with Charo, who also brought this into relationship with your own collection. So tonight we have Charo here to talk, to start us off with the artwork, to talk about an artist in your collection, to Ed Archie Noisecat.
Yeah, it's like you were saying, this is a real collaborative effort, which I love that you were open to that idea. And we did have this space, so we had an opportunity to draw a few works from our collection. And the first wall, when you enter that corridor, is Ed Archie Noisecat's work. So I selected 3 of his works, and then just behind John here, there's 2 other works by Ed Pien that Diana and Zoe will probably refer to when they talk about his work. But part of my thinking, especially with the placement too, was to make kind of connection to this place. And so Ed Archie Noisecat is grew up in Secwepemc-Ulu, is a Secwepemc artist. And so having his work next to Robert Davidson, who's a Haida artist, felt like a nice kind of grounding in this place. So his mother is from Canham Lake Band, and his father is from Lillooet Band. So he draws on his ancestral stories and having grown up in Secwepemc-Ulu. And so I chose the 3 works, Wolves of the Sea and Shaman's Circle are the 2 prints. And the spirit who brings the salmon is the mask that you'll see in the center. And they're all from 1990. So Ed, he actually left here and went to Emily Carr University. He graduated there in 1986. And then he moved to New York, and he worked for a print kind of studio called Tyler Graphics. And I found out as I was doing the research that he printed prints for artists like Frank Stella and Roy Lichtenstein, but also David Hockney, which was a nice connection. So his work, like Robert Davidson, he's kind of a master of many mediums, but real master printmaker. So with those 3 works, I was thinking about storytelling, passing on traditional stories, also his contemporary approach to the mediums and sharing these stories. And in particular with the work, The Spirit Who Brings the Salmon, I was thinking about the exhibition that many of you would have seen in 2023 called Echoes, where we had a video collaboration by Jeffrey McNeil Seymour and Dana Danger. And they did a ceremony by the river here where they took cedar boughs and bones of the salmon, and Dana cut Jeffrey's braid, and they did an offering into the water. And so, you know, as Dina was giving her welcome and talking about food sovereignty, you know, there's the importance of salmon, the salmon migration as a sustenance for people is part of that, but it's also cultural medicine, and it's the ceremony that's really important. And so I wanted to kind of ground us in that as you come into these different ways of telling stories.
Thank you, Charo. So if we move on to the works by Robert Davidson, so if you continue on the corridor, and I encourage you to go and go down the corridor, you can still hear my voice. So Robert Davidson is a Haida artist who was born in 1946 and still lives today. He's the great-grandson of the artist Charles Edenshaw, so really, a sort of Haida royalty, really has a very artistic lineage. His father was also a carver. In the mid-60s, he moved to Vancouver to go to high school. There he had the opportunity to meet and work with Bill Reid, the famous Bill Reid, and to study design and carving with him. He would also later study at Vancouver School of Art. And he would go on to be really an important carver, totem poles. He's done jewelry. He's done painting. We did bring one painting and carving, a stunning large work. But many of the works that we brought were smaller prints that he had made. The Vancouver Art Gallery has so many prints in their collection that we decided to focus on prints that looked at the Haida character of the Raven, who is this charismatic figure who turns up a lot in their spiritual belief system and is often linked with tales of creation. I wanted to just read a brief quote by Robert Davidson. He says, "Since the almost complete destruction of our spirit, our disconnection from our values and beliefs, it is the art that is bringing us back to our roots." So this revisiting of these characters that come from Haida cosmology, is incredibly important. It's really reviving. His goal was really to revive, to reactivate these stories, these important stories that were part of Haida culture. That, as we know, the Canadian government had long and within colonialism wanted to destroy Indigenous culture, people and belief systems. So it's these prints may seem perhaps simple in their execution, but they're in fact incredibly sophisticated. Haida design is known for its elegant curvilinear forms, its sense of design, its bold use of red and black. So I encourage you to look at that and to admire that. I just wanted to mention just a couple words about the prints. One thing that's really nice is that he used the prints and the character of the raven to announce things like, some of them are actually invitations or announcements. So you'll see there's like the birth of a child or a wedding invitation or even the announcement of a new address. And one neat fact is that he preferred to print onto brown paper because that linked with wood carving, indigenous wood carving. I think we can move on to triangle trade. So in the, there's a black box theater projection room in the far corner at the end of the corridor. Is that? Yeah, so I encourage you again to go see. There's a short video. It's called Triangle Trade, and it's by Camille Turner, Colleen Smith, and Jérôme Havre. The three artists are three black artists from different backgrounds, different practices. Jérôme Havre is a French artist who also has been, dividing his time between France and Toronto. Camille Turner is a black Canadian artist who was originally from Jamaica, and Colleen Smith is from California. So the title triangle trade refers, of course, to the transatlantic slave trade. So it's important to think about the meaning of, or the impacts of the transatlantic slave trade, where basically, which is really the reason that we have a black diaspora across the world today. So during this era, European empires enslaved millions of people from Africa from the mid-16th to the mid-19th century and used them to work for their benefit of their empires in the Caribbean and the Americas. So if you stop and think, if the slave trade just hadn't existed, then there might not be this black diaspora throughout the world. Each character, you will note, is a puppet that represents each one of the artists. So these are marionettes that Jérôme Havre designed. So Jérôme's avatar is on a desert island. Camille Turner is on a cold, icy island. And Colleen Smith is on a volcano whose, she lives on this volcano, this dormant volcano, and then suddenly there's this big explosion where, which causes all of them to kind of land in a third space. So really, the story is a kind of Afrofuturist tale, a kind of science fiction tale, which allows us to think about the impact of geography on the black diaspora. So where you ended up, how did that impact you? I really like this animation a lot because it also shares glimpses of the artists manipulating the marionettes too. So it really makes you aware of the mechanics of storytelling itself, where, in a way, if we sort of think about the basis of storytelling, it's where we put these figures into different landscapes, different settings, and they're sort of, we manipulate them to think about their potentials, what are their potential trajectories, and they allow us in a way to live vicariously through their experiences and perhaps learn something. So I'll end there.
So a nice kind of segue from that film, from the Triangle Triad, to another work, video work, which is on the screen on the wall when you come out of the video room, by Marina Roy. So it is also a science fiction, and as Zoe was saying, ways, of other futurisms, ways thinking about issues of ecological change, of slavery, of ways of thinking through difficult situations. So artists use often fiction or science fiction in particular with these two works. This work, the artist Marina is Vancouver-based. She's a professor at UBC. And often her work it's realized through whatever medium she needs to complete the idea. So here she's done an animation. It's a work that often her work is characterized by material sensibilities and aesthetics that are described as the grotesque. And really this work addresses this kind of non-human perspective and counter to the tendencies towards human centralism. She's really thinking kind of playfully around some of these. Similar to the last film, there's sort of this idea too of the world breaking into three parts. So you have three islands in this. There's the ice island, the mountain island, and the forest island. And each is inhabited by a woman. And all life forms are birthed through a tree. So the artist has described that the women are no longer responsible for birthing the life. They actually can enjoy their lives. So you see them throughout the film sort of sitting at the side, having conversation, smoking together, and enjoying their time. But at the same time, there's this sort of uncanny and unnerving sort of darker side to it, despite the sort of colorful brightness and kind of interesting creative figures. There is this virus that begins to spread across the island. We see it sort of forming through this pink slime. And the artist relates this back to the material she used to make the work. So the work is made from vinyl offcuts. So like vinyl you see in this exhibition that's used often in exhibitions for title walls, for various didactics. She went to the sign shops and collected the offcuts, so things that they would normally discard, and then cut out all the characters. So all the colors you see are from the original color of the vinyl, and vinyl itself is a petroleum product. So she's kind of thinking through all the products that are made out of all this, plastic materials, disposable economies, and really tying it back, using that to sort of create this. And I think if you're looking at the screen now, you also see this resemblance of these Matisse figures. So she's sort of borrowing from art historical relationships too, but to tell this kind of story of a post-apocalyptic eco-disaster. But then the sort of rebirth of a world that takes place when we change our relationship from a hierarchical one to one that's more linear, where we have this horizontal relationship and maybe a decentering of the human and relationship with non-human or with other animals. And if we sort of think through some of the rawness of the color and maybe the uncanniness in this, and if I just sort of direct your attention to, if you turn around to the other wall, which is across from it, we have a series of works here from the Royal Art Lodge. This was a collective in Winnipeg in the 80s and 90s, really in the 90s, that were making work collaboratively. So something else that comes up a lot in this exhibition, not in the way that we worked together to put it together, but also how a lot of these artists worked was collaboratively. So this was a collective of 8 artists, recent graduates from art school, and also included one who was the sister of Marcel Zama, one of the artists of Royal Art Lodge that went off on a solo career. But really, their process of making work, they would sit around a table. They described it themselves as the sort of socially awkward group, therapy group, where they would come together, create works. One would begin the work with a drawing, pass it to the next, and they might write a little bit of text. They might add a bit of collage, which you would see from newsprint or other things, and then each would add on. And at the end, they would determine if that work was going to stay or go. They would stamp the work. So this was really, none of them, not one of the 8, would claim ownership over this work. It was really a collaboration under the name Royal Art Lodge. And they had hundreds of prints. So the Vancouver Art Gallery is very fortunate to have a large body of their work. We made a selection for the show to bring here. There's no, the instructions when you're installing this work is really for you to take ownership, for you to tell the narrative. And I think because, you know, they're each individually framed, each work stands on its own. Each work is one sort of vignette where you can then create your own story, but also each curator gets, you know, the fun of creating their own mini stories or their own relationships between works. So here you see Charo's take with various, we were commenting the other day about how you have this work of love on one side, you know, it's maybe a relationship corner here with first love, but the fear of that maybe. So, you know, there's really no right way or wrong way to hang these. It's actually, it's a very fun work. But similar to Marina's too, there's something uncanny about it. There's something often that's a little bit dark in some of the images. Another thing I would say about these artists is they borrow from a lot of traditions of art making. Everything from Victorian style illustration to more Japanese anime, to yokai traditions, so another Japanese tradition of spirits. But this really sort of conflates together. And then in the 90s was a time when illustration, graffiti art, and more sort of interdisciplinary works of visual culture that were considered maybe at the time to be low art. Now we see them in institutions and we don't think that much about it, but really it was a time when it was quite rare. You would see it in maybe non-institutions, but you would see it. And there was a magazine, Juxtapose, that was popular at the time, and it started to publish the works. It was about this sort of street culture, and their work really comes out in this time of illustration. And there today, we do see lots of illustrators and graffiti artists in museums, but this really was a time when it was quite rare. And I think we'll move now to the other side. It's also me, so we've divided it up. So you're going to hear me a little bit more. So to David Hockney. So for those of you who came to see a David Hockney painting, we don't have the painting here, but what we do have are his works on paper as well. He's quite known for his printmaking and his cross-hatching. So what you would do to create sort of texture and tone and light on the work. You really see this in his illustrations for the brothers, the fairy tales of the Brother Grimm's fairy tales. But these works, I will maybe mention about first. Rake's Progress is one of his earliest works, print works. It's of an early time in his career in '61. So this is when the artist was living in London. He tells, it's borrowed, the title of the work is borrowed from William Hogarth's satirical illustrations that were done about a very wealthy son of a merchant who goes off in sort of Flanders and spends the money on parties and pleasure. And so David Hockney, I'm gonna call him David, Hockney took this sort of idea, but he tells his own tale. So he brings the work, this is something he does in all his works, so in his paintings as well. But prior to his life in LA, he went in one of his first trips to America to New York. And this is in '61. So this is a time when free love in America wasn't so free. Homosexuality was criminalized. It wasn't until a few years later that it was decriminalized. It wasn't until '69 that Stonewall happened. But there was pockets of New York where you could see men together. And so for Hockney, this was really coming from London, which took a bit longer to decriminalize homosexuality. He felt that he could experiment, and you see this, some of these encounters in the work, some of his own sort of experience. You see him in front of skyscrapers and things that were different and new to him coming from London. And the work it really sort of all of his work, like much of his work, including the works that we know him so well for, his paintings in LA that really capture the color and the light of that place, are also really stories of the people he knows, and often loosely based on his own experiences. And then another work that we wanted to bring in that really relates to the theme of stories, of fairy tales, is the Brothers Grimm's illustration by David Hockney. So that's the large book that you see in the vitrine. The book is part of our special collections at the gallery, which we have of artist books, but unfortunately it can't be flipped through. But what we did do is there's a video that you can access, that you can watch someone else flipping through a mini version of the book. And I believe the book is being ordered. Oh, the video's in the back. Yeah, so the video's in the back, so you can see that. Yeah, so as you're making your way around, you can see that too. And there were a number of prints of the book that were done in the 70s. They made smaller editions of this book. So really, another thing that will come up in Ed Pien's work is the way that different cultures handle sort of fairy tales and fables, and these notions of morality that sort of come through, that fairy tales are often have underlined, and they're quite scary at times, and quite violent. Some of the imagery that looks like for a children's book, but really these were ways to sort of, scare children into doing, and adults as well, into kind of doing what was maybe socially acceptable at the time. So I think, another theme that we're thinking through a lot in this show are different ways that artists grapple with some of these ideas and how stories are disseminated through children's books.
I'll just say a few words about the Joyce Wieland drawings, paintings over there in the corner. So Joyce Wieland, if you don't know, is one of Canada's most foremost artists and experimental filmmakers. She was known when she started her career in the 60s, and really interested in integrating craft practices, like quilting, for example, into her work. Also, her use of pop culture, her referencing of the politics of the time, and her use of humor. She was, engaging with questions like that had to do with feminism, the environment, and the nationalism. Trudeau mania, for example, and has just throughout. Until her death in the 90s is just considered and continues to be an important female artist, one of the rare female artists at the time in a very male-dominated field. This is her work in the 80s, before her death in the 90s, that she made for a couple, the Montagues, these were drawings that might be slipped into an envelope. You can see, for example, the corrugated edges of the ripped edges of the sheets, the note paper. So these are very casual, really made for somebody that she loved. But for people that she loved, a couple that she loved, great friends of hers. And I think what's lovely about these is that you can really see what I mentioned before, how drawing is such a delightful way to explore storytelling. Where you really can sort of let your mind go free. These are there's just so much play and joy. I just thought they were just absolutely delightful, and we needed to pull them from the collection to share. Hopefully, they're inspiring for people. I'll let Diana take over and talk a bit about the Ed Piens.
Okay, really, another sort of otherworldly works, maybe less bright and colorful and whimsical, but also really kind of pulling from the more of the afterlife, but looking really again at this sort of relationship between Asian understandings of the ghosts and spirits, and I was mentioning earlier the yokai tradition in Japan, which really is you see a lot of visual imagery in artists like Takashi Murakami, and also very traditional works of these spirits, and they're not, or of these ghosts. So they're more creatures that they look otherworldly, but they also look vaguely human, which we see in Ed Pien. And this series of work of his, which was created in the 90s, was created after his trip to Taiwan. So Ed is an artist who was born in Taiwan, moved to Canada when he was 11, and grew up in Ontario. And many years later, he had his first return trip. And on that trip, he was taking in everything from contemporary aspects of the culture to really sort of traditional places and spaces, including some of the temples and the books. And he was spending a lot of time looking at and learning about the different understandings of afterlife in these, but also bringing the works together. You have a really nice two bodies of works, or from the same series of works here, but the works on the right, my right. So if you're looking at the wall, you have these larger format framed works of two figures, and these are coming from the collection here in Kamloops. And then the works on the left with the hungry ghosts, the angry ghosts, the sad ghosts, and then the one with the figure with a virus or things growing on his face. They're works that really, they sort of show these hybrid figures that are somewhat manipulated from reality, but also strangely familiar. Images of disease or states of mutation. And they borderline similar to, with Marina's work on the grotesque, but they're not, one of the things about the various parts of this exhibition, which brings together diverse works and artists and cultures, is that the understanding of monsters is not necessarily scary, the way that we think about spirits or demons or the grotesque as being something often in Western culture that's a monster is scary, but often the scariness is there to protect you in yokai tradition. So it's actually a friendly ghost because it's friendly for you, but not so friendly for the evil that you want to keep away from you. So just different ways of seeing, and Ed was really thinking through some of these when he made a very large body of work, and you're seeing a sort of a smaller grouping of it here. And now, turning to sort of the horrors, to more horrors of the grotesque, we'll make our way to the back corridor to Goya's work.
So we have here Francisco de Goya's The Disasters of War. So Francisco Goya made this important series of 80 prints in response to the Spanish War of Independence in 1807. So this was when France under Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Spain, and which resulted in war and famine that lasted several years. Goya actually started the series during the war, but interestingly enough, did not print them to be seen until they were not printed until after. Well after his death. Just a few words about the series themselves. I think looking at them, you can understand why they remain so impactful even today. They are known for influencing an artist like Pablo Picasso in his Guernica. But also we can think about these works and the impacts of war in relation to the wars that are happening now, whether in the Ukraine, Lebanon, or Palestine. the series is interesting to note. The first images are notable for their almost photorealistic depictions of war and the violence and the bloodiness of it. The second set looks at the famine and the impacts of famine that war had caused. But what we decided to show here is the last section that he made, which is really where Goya uses a more allegorical approach. So you'll see their monsters, their skeletons who talk. He's fully cynical, and he's fully cynical about the war. Historians have noted that it's hard to tell who are the heroes, who are the good guys, who are the bad guys, who are the victims, and so I think it's very important to also read the captions underneath, and we have the translations of the captions on the label. There you can sense his despair and almost a lack of belief in the good of humanity. So it's a very devastating series. We can maybe move. I'll just say a few words about the artist Osvaldo Ramirez Castillo, who is there are two drawing collages in the corner over here. So Osvaldo is known, he's an artist from El Salvador originally. He moved to Canada as a preteen in the 80s. So during that time, El Salvador was facing a terrible civil war. Basically against guerrilla groups against the military regime that existed there at the time. You'll see his work often deals with the traumatic events of the war. In particular, there was the El Mazote massacre, which is still known as one of the biggest massacres in Central and South America. So where the military army basically killed point blank, over 1,000 civilians, including women and children. A few words about his style. Osvaldo is inspired by, he makes references to, or he borrows from everything from botanical drawings to medical drawings. He loves artists like Goya, of course, like Goya. And I think you can see this sort of mixing of these mixings of different references. There's also, I think you can imagine graffiti, tattoos, and Mesoamerican symbology in his works. One thing about you'll notice that from these amputated figures, so these figures in these drawings are really his homage to these victims of war. And these brave guerrilla fighters who then died. Many, as you can see, are amputated, so you can imagine, what a difficult life and death. One thing he mentioned that since moving to the West Coast, he had previously lived out east in Montreal. He mentioned he noticed that in his work, his drawings started to include these sort of lush greenery that started to emerge in his more recent drawings since moving to Vancouver. So I hope that's maybe a note of optimism to end in this sort of a section that deals with the devastation of war. And Diana will bring us out of this dark moment, hopefully.
Yeah, we won't leave you there. We do want to end on, take Osvaldo as our lead, to think that from trauma and from war, there are times and opportunities for regrowth and resilience and regeneration. And I think that, artists do give us that hope. It's not on them to create that, but there are works in this show. And to bring it sort of back full circle, we began with artists that were looking at culture and cultural resilience. And the last work in the exhibition is also a video work. So I can't talk about it directly in front, but I know you'll see everything. So I will just say a bit about the work and the artist. And this is the work by Amanda Strong. It is not the work that we showed in the original exhibition that we did, but this is a work we're super excited to show because it's a work that we acquired after the exhibition. And it's a beautiful, beautiful piece. Amanda's a Métis artist, was trained in photography and illustration, but soon moved into making filmmaking. And all of the film that we show in this exhibition is really, you see the gesture of the artist's hand. The making that goes into the work is very important. And in this work, she creates these very detailed world. She makes puppets, and the puppets are based on characters, sometimes from people she knows in her life, but others also based on stories written by Indigenous authors like Leanne Simpson, who you do have also in the gallery store here. This particular work, Bidabun, is an Anishinaabe word for the point of light before the dawn, or before the day breaks. So it's dawn, and the work's English title is called The Dawn Comes. And there are two main characters in this story. Sebe, who is a shapeshifter, who comes to see the artist, and the artist is an Anishinaabe artist who lives in a home and at nighttime, so they go just before the break of night and into the dawn to tap the trees for sap. And they're led through the urban environment with the spirit of caribou and a wolf. And in this, we don't see, other than the artist, we don't see any human characters. But there is this ominous presence with the homes because they're in this very sort of urban environment. We see lights go on. We see the presence of something quite ominous that's watching them all the time. But they have to go in the deep of the night to sort of reclaim this maple. And as I was saying, it is based on a story of another artist. And I won't go into the detail because you can see the work. But really, it's a work that addresses issues that are related to land development, the displacement of people and animals, the need for cultural reclamation, but also a way of sort of reorientating ourselves in the world and our relationship to nature and to land and to animals. And this piece, which, like many of the works, a lot of the themes flow through this exhibition. And I think, as we maybe end here and you go off into the night, I would just want to leave with another question. So we asked, people in the introduction to the show, sort of what stories do you tell? But really it's, I think, at a time that we also think about what myths are we creating now? What stories are the artists going to tell about our time now? So the question, what narratives of historical telling and future visions will we develop to explain the profound ecological, the social and the political changes that are occurring in our world today. So I would say, as you look at this show, but as you also look to the artists that you see throughout here, including Adrian's exhibition, wonderful exhibition in the Cube, you think about the narratives that the artists are telling, but also the narratives that they create for your own life. So thank you.